We're very happy to have you here, Vaughn. Vaughn Wolf is the Education and Community Outreach Officer for the YWCA in Kitsap County. And I think that you will be surprised at the breadth and depth of the great work that the YWCA does here. We have had a partnership with the Y since 2017. We've been supportive of some of their programs. And I am eager to learn about all that's going on now. So thank you for joining us, Vaughn.
Absolutely. Thank you, Reed. I appreciate it. So this presentation typically takes anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on questions in between. So, if anybody has a question, I can't see anybody right now, so feel free to just, chime on in. Otherwise, I'll have some time at the end to answer any lingering questions. So I want to talk about our programs and services and events for 2020 and how things are looking for us right now, especially in the midst of COVID-19. I want to first start off with a quote that we like to use from the CEO of YWCA USA, which is that not every YWCA has a pool, but we help women when they feel like they are drowning. So our mission is that we are dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. I wanted to leave this screen up so you all can kind of look at, our vision, our core values, and our commitment. And talk a little bit about, what our services are here in Kitsap and what they're kind of focused on. So with our specific services for Kitsap County, we are actually the only DSHS domestic violence certified provider in all of Kitsap. So we serve all of Kitsap County when it comes to domestic violence services. Although our mission is eliminating racism as well, we find that a lot of our programs are centered around domestic violence because we're the only certified provider. So a lot of our programs are mainly dedicated to that, while we continue to build programs for the other parts of our mission when it comes to social justice issues and empowering women. So a little bit about our history. We actually opened up with a storefront office in 1948. In that time, we served military and civilian women as well as youth. Mrs. Lillian Walker, who was an original founding member of YWCA, is known for sharing this quote with us, which is coffee was 5 cents a cup if you could afford it. And if you couldn't afford it, you got it anyway. So a lot of small programs started up then. It wasn't until 1978, in partnership with Olympic College, that we opened up the emergency shelter that we still operate as of today. At the time, it was opened up as the YWCA Alive Shelter, which is Alternatives to Living in a Violent Environment. We now refer to it as just the Emergency Shelter Program. Reasons being is that people often get it misconstrued that the Alive program is somehow separate from YWCA. So there were some changes made to make sure people know that the emergency shelter is still a program of YWCA. Linda Joyce came on as executive director in 1994, and she was instrumental in a lot of expansion of programs, as well as moving the YWCA location from a temporary location to the permanent location we now have on Pacific Avenue. As of today, YWCA serves over 10,000 people annually. We provide a safety net of supportive services for domestic violence survivors, and we continue to develop our programs for the emerging needs of the community.
Oh. So at this point, do you have a storefront where you can get a cup of coffee, or is that sort of a thing of the past?
We don't have a storefront as it is anymore. However, when people do come into the administration building to access services, they are met with trauma-informed services. So that could be offering of water, offering of a beverage, offering of snacks and things like that to make them feel comfortable. And then there's folks in the emergency shelter who have access to anything and everything they need as well, and whatever they request to make themselves feel comfortable. So we don't have a storefront office as it was in 1948. We've kind of moved into more of a formality of a business.
Thanks.
Yeah. Just a quick review over our current leadership as it stands with our board of directors. And then, of course, our leadership staff when it comes to the admin building and management. You'll see that I'm the manager of the education community outreach. And we have Meg Quinlivan as the executive director, Lucretia Robertson as director of operations. She manages the buildings and different properties that belong to YWCA. We have our director of finance who does everything as far as money is concerned. And then we have our residential services manager, Tammy Ross, who manages the emergency shelter as well as our Home Safe program. So just a little bit of information about what's going on here in Washington State. This was some statistics that were pulled from 2018, published in 2019. We're still waiting for some updated statistics for 2019. From 2018, we know that 49.1% of all crime against persons is domestic violence. There was almost 57,000 domestic violence incidents reported that year in Washington State. Of the 16,685 violations of orders, almost 13,000 orders were domestic violence related. And of the almost 40,000 domestic violence incidents involving weapons, we have 28,000 incidents that involved personal weapons. This is our people's feet, their hands, any kind of physical contact with their body. And then 563 incidents involved firearms. The reason why this is important is because we know that when there's a firearm in the home of those folks who are going through domestic violence, there's actually a 500% increase of there being a homicide inside of that home. So this is why it's so important that we talk about firearms when it comes to these incidents as well.
It also jumps out at me how much of what we classify as crime is actually hidden in many ways from our law enforcement and probably from many agencies because it happens inside domestic situations and is therefore a lot more, invisible to many of us, and it's harder to reach out and get help.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Reed. I think it's important for people to understand that although we have these statistics and they can be alarming, we know that this is severely underreported. This crime is severely underreported, and in many cases, it's not labeled correctly. Some of the cases that are reported are not labeled DV; they're instead labeled just assault. And it's important that we're able to collect these things accurately, and that's something that we consistently work on with law enforcement and the courts. But it's important for people to know that this is just that tip of the iceberg that we see above the water. There's that whole section underneath the water that we don't see and we don't know about because it's such a crime that is private. Linda Joyce, who passed away in 2014, left us with this quote: "We have to stand up and say enough is enough. Our young boys and girls are suffering. Our women and our men are suffering. There's still work to do." So this is our programs right now that we are running. So we have our 24-hour domestic violence hotline and text line. So anybody can call this hotline, whether they are a person experiencing domestic violence or domestic abuse. Perhaps they don't know if they're experiencing any kind of abuse and they have questions about what that looks like. We answer questions for young people, for youth who call, who might be in a dating relationship with another teen, and maybe they feel like that the relationship may not be healthy. And we're also here for family and friends, co-workers, and service providers in the community who might have questions around someone they think or know might be experiencing domestic violence. So we do safety planning over the phone. Our advocates are very informed and trained to handle crisis situations over the phone, as well as provide information, resources, and referrals not only to our own programs, but to programs throughout the county and if needed outside of the county. The text line was implemented specifically for youth. We find that youth are less likely to call and would prefer to text. So that's why we implemented that text line.
Any of us with kids or grandkids might agree with that. You can't get an email response. They don't answer their phone, but texting works beautifully.
That's true. I mentioned earlier we have our emergency shelter. It is a confidential emergency housing opportunity for those who are actively fleeing a dangerous situation. So these are for folks who have left or who plan to leave, and so they set up a plan with us to make sure that they have a bed available. We often have law enforcement who might call and say they have someone that they've responded to a crime to and they want to leave the household. In other cases, we might have someone coming directly from a hospital following a violent incident. Our emergency shelter is 13 beds. However, that doesn't mean that it's only 13 people who stay in our shelter. We have rollout beds and cribs for young people and children. So often that actually adds to the bed count. A lot of folks wonder, what if a person doesn't have a bed available? And when that happens, we often will refer them out to a shelter, whether it is within Kitsap County or outside of Kitsap County, whatever is the safest means for them to be able to get to and is actually attainable for them. We have a legal advocacy program. These are advocates that help with assistance and support navigating the criminal and civil legal systems. Our legal advocates do not give legal advice. Some people might not understand the difference between legal advocate and actual legal counsel. So what our legal advocates do is they'll give them information on what it might look like to go through the criminal or civil legal systems, court dates, protection orders. They'll help them navigate it if their abuser is incarcerated and might have a release date soon. So the advocate is responsible for making sure that the victim is aware if that's happening and when it's going to happen and safety plan around that. Our legal advocates will also identify pro bono attorneys, because one of the biggest barriers for people going through this is that they don't have access to resources and financial resources in particular. So our advocates will identify pro bono attorneys, or at least attorneys that are willing to work with our specific victims and where they're at in their situation. We also have a monthly legal clinic that is in partnership with Kitsap Legal Services, where they get to talk to an attorney for free and get some advice on what they should be doing in their situation. When it comes to supportive housing, we do have some transitional housing and long-term housing available for those who are in our programs. This particular program is meant for individuals or families who are no longer in a crisis situation. So they have moved past the crisis mode. They're no longer having to deal too much with whatever trauma that they have been having to work through, and now they need a stable place to stay and work on building their lives up again. So this might look like they get into a housing situation with us, and then they now can look for a stable job to be able to support that income, or perhaps they've gotten a job and are more stable and are now are able to actually get into our housing. So it really depends on the person's situation. The long-term housing situation can be years. We know that folks who go through domestic violence are having to work through the trauma of having to go through that as well. So we allot a lot of time, and they continue to receive services such as advocacy, safety planning, resources, and referrals while they're in our housing programs.
I've heard of Morrow Manor. Is that something that you're involved with?
I'm not involved with it directly. However, we do know that we're actually going through the key turning ceremony this August. So we're very excited about that. We're going to get the keys, and we already have, from what I understand, at least a couple of families identified to move in there immediately. So we're very excited about that.
So that is a housing solution that maybe some of you have heard about, that maybe you even supported through fundraising. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We have our family advocacy program. So this is case management and community resources for families who are going through domestic violence. So this might be a mother and her children. Perhaps they're not in our emergency shelter, and perhaps they're not in our housing programs, but they're still needing advocacy and support. We want to make sure that the children have access to resources as well. So the children get referrals to any kind of mental health resources or any other kind of support they need, even basic things such as food, clothing, if the moms need, baby formula, things like that. So we want to make sure the whole family unit is actually taken care of. We have our Work First program. This is in partnership with DSHS. As some of you may know, for folks who are accessing support from DSHS, they have certain requirements that they need to meet, especially when it comes to applying for jobs. I mentioned earlier that a lot of the folks who are going through domestic violence are just not in a position to look for a job because of the trauma that they are having to work through, and they're still going through healing. So we have a partnership in the sense that if folks are accessing DSHS benefits, then their one requirement is to be able to go through our programs, some of them even going to our support groups, where they go through that healing, they get access to resources, and they continue to submit those to DSHS so they can continue to receive benefits while they're going through their healing without having to worry about having to look for a job on top of it all. Speaking of support groups, we have weekly facilitated support groups throughout Kitsap County. Right now, we have support groups for women, children 9 through 12 years old, youth 13 through 17. We have Spanish-speaking support groups, and then we have support groups for LGBTQIA+ individuals. And we continue to identify, as people come to us and they're looking for that kind of support, what other ones we can continue to build on. But as of right now, the LGBTQ, the children, the youth are the newest ones that we have because we saw such a need for those in the community as it doesn't exist at this time. Last is our education community outreach program. Right now, I'm kind of it for YWCA, and we continue to develop that. But right now, what we're focusing on is domestic violence education and prevention. This is done through presentations such as this, but also our Recognize, Respond, and Refer trainings. These are trainings that are specifically tailored to certain groups of individuals, such as first responders. How does a first responder recognize someone who's experiencing abuse? How do they respond to someone in that environment? And how do they safely refer them to our services? We have one for business owners. We have one for landlords. We have one for healthcare providers. We have one for people who are educators, and specifically educators for youth. So these are specifically geared trainings for those particular groups, and they're free because we want them to be able to recognize someone who might be experiencing abuse and be able to get them help. We have In Her Shoes and In Their Shoes simulation trainings. If you haven't watched that training before, it's actually really cool. The In Her Shoes gives people the ability to walk through the shoes of someone who is actively experiencing domestic violence. And while they're experiencing domestic violence in their particular situation, what does it look like as they continue to live their life and try to access resources? What happens if they try to go to a domestic violence advocate while going to school, while trying to go to work, while also dealing with their abuser? So it's actually a simulation where people get to make choices to find out what kind of impact it might have on their character story. The In Their Shoes simulation training is actually one specifically for teens. So it's actually walking the shoes of a teen who is experiencing dating abuse, who might also still be living with their parents, or who might just be going to college or just starting off. So it depends on who's taking it. I typically do In Her Shoes for adults, and I do In Their Shoes for youth and possibly their parents if they want to also walk the simulation. We have our 30-hour domestic violence core competency training that takes place quarterly. Our next one is actually in August, and it'll be our first virtual one. And I can actually send those dates over. You can also see the dates on our website if you go to ywcakitsap.org and check out our education tab. You can register for the training right there. That is the only training that comes with a fee. It's $250. However, it is 30 hours of content. That is the basic requirements for anyone who wants to offer domestic violence services in Washington State. So it comes with a certification. It is state certified. But it's actually just a lot of really good information. A lot of people who are working with people who might be experiencing domestic abuse in their programs or in their services can gain a lot of information and apply it to their particular work. So it's very educational. And so if you have any questions about it, you can see the breakdown of what's covered on our site, and then see which dates are available here in 2020. Lastly is our racial equity and social justice advocacy. This takes place in various forms, and one of the forms that we're doing right now is our 21-day racial equity and social justice challenge, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But we get involved with advocacy when it comes to social justice issues. We support certain groups and work with partners in the community to make sure that we're addressing racial equity and social justice in our community and working towards agreed upon goals to see what changes we can make and advocate for in our county as it applies to our county.
We have a inclusion study group here at the Senior Center, and we're actually going to have a discussion this Friday in this time point about the Suquamish editorial that was posted in the Kitsap Sun, what, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe? We are looking for ways to make connections and energize seniors and supporters of how we can be advocates, how we can be good ancestors. So I look forward to looking for ways that we might learn from you and your organization about that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. If anything comes of that, I'd love to learn more. That way we can also share that content too for anybody else who might be interested in joining, if it's open to everyone.
It is indeed open to everyone.
Awesome. I'll connect with you later on that then.
Can I just ask a real quick question? How do I access the one that in their shoes?
So if you are interested in any other training other than the domestic violence 30-hour, then you would just send an email to education@ywcakitsap.org. You can also send me an email. And my email is vwolfe@ywcakitsap.org. Let me know, the training that you're looking for. Right now, the In Her Shoes and In Their Shoes simulation trainings are not going on, and that's because of COVID. So I can't do that one virtually. It hasn't been adapted virtually. You have to actually physically walk through that exercise. However, we can still at least talk about it. I can let you know about it, and then maybe we can schedule something down the line in hopes that perhaps we've moved into phase 3 by then.
Thanks, Vaughn.
Absolutely. So in 2019, YWCA served 10,398 people. And here's a breakdown of all of the different services. You'll see that the numbers don't add up directly to 10,000, and that's because you have some clients who are accessing multiple different programs at once. But what I really want to look at right here is the safety plans that were provided. We had almost 13,000 safety plans that were provided in 2019. These numbers will look very different for 2020. And the reason is because of COVID-19. So in March, when we had the shelter-in orders that came into place, we noticed that our hotline calls had actually increased. And that our safety plans were increasing, as well as especially our legal services advocacy. And we found after looking at the numbers that we had an increase on average of about 40% between April and June. And the services asked for were not specifically from victims. They were actually from friends and family. And what we understand is that right now, with folks who are isolated at home with their abuser, they do not have the means to reach out to us right now. They either can't leave the house, or perhaps the abuser is not able to go to work, so they're staying at home all the time, which means that the victim has less access to call law enforcement or call us for services. So instead, we've had a lot of friends and family who have called in, neighbors who've called in to access any services that they can. A lot of it has to do with safety planning because they're still in connection with the victim. So they would pass on the safety plans that our advocates would provide directly to the victim themselves, which has been really helpful as far as still being able to serve people. However, our concern, although is deeply seated in the right here, right now, our concern is after we move into phase 3 and the orders are lifted that people can come out more and more, that, abusers return to work, we're going to see an increase in calls then from victims themselves. This typically happens over the holidays, where we have a little bit of a lull during the holidays, but then after the holidays are over, we'll see a spike in services and calls. So we are concerned after how long it's been that we might get a very large request for services. So we continue to train our advocates and keep our advocates informed with that. And we are constantly, I think the key word here is pivoting. So we consistently pivot our services and how we provide those services to people and how we get the information out to folks. So what we're doing right now is that we are asking volunteers to take materials such as posters, brochures, and go to essential businesses. So grocery stores, banks, gas stations, everywhere we know people are visiting right now, so that they can see that information and they know our hotline numbers, they know what services we provide, and be able to pass that information on to anybody they know might be experiencing abuse. One of the biggest helps that we've seen is that our posters are being hung up in bathroom stalls, so that if there is a victim who is out and about with their abuser, oftentimes the bathroom stall is the only place that they are by themselves. So if they're in the stall, they can sit right there and give us a call or text us, which has been really helpful as well. So this is some of our special events and campaigns that we've held and will hold in 2020. So the biggest thing that we have is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. That takes place in October. So when it comes to this particular month, that is where a lot of our biggest fundraiser is, which is the Women of Achievement. It's our biggest fundraiser, and it's a luncheon. It's where we celebrate local women in our community and what they've done for our community. With everything else, so the Clothesline Project, that's when we ask victims and their families, I should say survivors and their families, who will come out and decorate shirts, and we'll hang them around the office, but also around Bremerton and sometimes throughout Kitsap County, so that people can see the artwork that is shared on these t-shirts, just to bring awareness to the issue of domestic violence. And then some other events we have planned for the month is our proclamation event, where we have community leaders, the mayors, tribal leaders who come together to sign the proclamation for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We have an annual board meeting that will be open to the public on the 22nd. The Arts Alive event is going to be an arts auction. And then Week Without Violence is also in October. It's just a week where we recognize that we want a week without violence. And so we'll share a lot of information, encourage other people to go on social media and do the same thing. As it stands, the events are still a go, but we don't know how it's going to go as it stands. So we have the idea that it will still take place, but we imagine that we're going to have to at least turn some of it into virtual events, and that information will come out probably the closer that we get to probably September is when we'll have a definite understanding of how we're going to host those events. Our Stand Against Racism campaign was April 23 through 26. It was a social media campaign where we asked people to take the pledge, share information, things like that. And then we have our 21-day Racial Equity and Social Justice Challenge that's happening right now. So it started on July 1. It's going through the 21st. And it's a complete virtual campaign and challenge. People get an email where they are challenged to take one or more of the challenges in the day. They can be as little as 5 minutes, where people can watch a video, read an article, or listen to a podcast. And then they can reflect on what they've learned, what their thoughts are about it. And it's just to challenge people to be able to learn a little bit more about the history of racial equity and social justice and where it is today and how it pertains to different portions of our community. Week 1 was all about voting. It also talked a little bit about how to be an anti-racist. And then right now we're in week 2, and week 2 is all about education. So we're talking about how education is taught in school, about the history of the civil rights movement, how the school to prison pipeline actually works. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how in college, how students are, how they are taught, and how we get students to talk about racial equity in their everyday lives. We also have subjects for the future coming up, which is criminal justice reform, and then how racism manifests itself in the healthcare system.
I've been receiving those emails, and the layout and design and clarity about how long various parts are going to take is really impressive. Is this a regional or national program of the YWCA?
It is. So it does come from national. All the materials are already designed and identified by national, and it has been successful across the country. So far, we know that over 700 zip codes have taken part in this challenge. And so we're going to be adding to that as far as the zip codes are concerned. The only adaptations that we've made to it is that we have added a lunch and learn session that will take place. The first one is actually this Friday. We've partnered with Kitsap Strong to be able to host this lunch and learn, where we are inviting local leaders from the community that are people of color to discuss the topics that we've learned over the past week, and to apply personal experiences to it for people to listen and learn a little bit more. So we have one on the 10th, we have one next Friday on the 17th, and then our last one will actually take place on the 21st. The 21st is meant to not just talk about the previous week's material, but also create a call to action. So we're asking people to come in and actually have dialogue. We'll break people up into groups where they're going to create an action plan just for Kitsap County, and something that we can continue pushing on our social media and get people to join, so that we have some obtainable things that people can actually do, and not just walk away saying that they were educated, but have some tangible action plan to do something with that education. So we're very excited about that. The only other alteration other than that is that there is a section just for Washington State later in the week, where we talk specifically about some of the things that are impacting just Washington State, and more specifically Kitsap County. We are also sharing additional information in the Facebook group. If you haven't joined Facebook or are not part of it, it's actually a really good way to get more information beyond just what the emails provide. People discuss what they've learned. They get additional articles, some more, 5-minute videos they can watch here and there, just for some supplemental information as it pertains to the topics at hand and anything else that's not covered in the challenge. A lot of people have been asking, what can I do as a business owner? What are microaggressions, and how can I make sure that I address them and I'm not doing them? So we've shared a lot of that kind of material as well, which is really nice, because it goes beyond just the challenges that are offered in the email. We have our volunteer appreciation event in August. I mentioned the Morrow Manor turnover ceremony. That's going to be August 14th. More information will be coming out about that soon. And I know there'll also be a virtual event for people to attend. We have a Young Professionals Kickoff that's supposed to happen in September. And this is just a committee of young professionals who will be continuing our work out in the community. We have a back to school program every September as well. We collect backpacks, materials, and things like that for the guests in our shelter, as well as the residents in our housing programs, and anybody else who might be a client who might not have those resources. We believe that, even if folks are not returning to school physically, that means that if they are doing it from home come September, then they might need things like laptops. So we are waiting to hear how that's going to go, and we'll adjust our program then. We have our Women of Achievement Alumni Tea that is going to take place in November to just bring back all the alumni from the Women of Achievement events. And then our holiday giving program starts up in November. This is when people can donate gifts to, they can adopt a family and donate gifts to the people in our housing and our shelter programs, just to continue creating a sense of normalcy in their lives about, with what's everything going on. It tends to be a time where it can be very impactful for them in a negative way, but we do our best to make sure that everybody gets gifts, the children are able to have gifts, and oftentimes they're coming to the shelter with nothing as it is. So it's a really nice time. And we also invite Santa to come in and actually deliver the gifts too. So it's a really cool program that we have. And we're really happy when donors can come in and make sure that the families have everything that they ask for. So this is how people can join our mission. So you can donate your time, skills, gifts, and of course money. It really depends on what your capacities are. We have different programs available for volunteers. As it stands right now, the only volunteers we can take on are people who are for materials distribution, which I mentioned earlier, with flyers, brochures, things like that throughout the county. We have on-call food pickup, so we get donations from different folks that donate food to us so that we can make sure our shelter is stocked and make sure our housing residents have enough food. And sometimes that is short notice when we can come pick up. So having volunteers ready for that is really, really supportive for us. And then, of course, we're looking for people for our Speakers Bureau. These are people who will go out and talk about YWCA, our programs. They will even give presentations like this to different groups of people. They can conduct small trainings like the R3 training, if trained right. So people who are on our Speakers Bureau are trained in everything that has to do with our organization, how to talk about our services, domestic violence. They have to take the 30-hour domestic violence training, and they have to take Speakers Bureau training. So a lot of training goes into these specific volunteers. So if anybody is interested in anything volunteer related, you can email our volunteer email at volunteer@ywcakitsap.org. You can get educated. I mentioned that earlier. And then you can participate in the events that are going on. Right now, we're really wanting people to get involved with the 21-day challenge and invite people to take it too. It's a really good opportunity to learn and engage with active things that are going on right now. And this is a last quote from Michelle Obama. Women and girls can do whatever they want. There's no limit to what we as women can accomplish. Do I have any questions?
Well, I'm just going to say that's an impressive array of programs, and I am wowed by the many ways that you're supporting women in Kitsap County. I'm hoping that you have a good volunteer group that is supporting that as well.
We do, and I am always looking for more. I'm kind of managing that program right now in collaboration with our development coordinator, but we're always looking for people to just go and spread out. We can't have enough of those folks. So if you know anybody, or if you want to have materials at the senior center, we can totally make sure that we can deliver that to you. I also want to mention a lot of our programs, the way that they're designed, because we're women empowerment, seem to be misconstrued with the fact that we only serve women. And I want to make sure that you all know that we don't. We actually serve men too. And so that's something that I like to make sure people know, is that although we are women-centered, because domestic violence is a gender-based crime that we find that disproportionately impacts women, we do serve men. We have a lot of men who come to our organization as well, and they have access to almost all the same services. The only things that they don't have access to as it stands is support groups. And that's just because we actually haven't had any men actually ask for that. And a lot of folks don't know, but we also house men in our shelter. The way our shelter is designed, people have their own spaces to live within the shelter, their own spaces to actually cohabitate. It's just that we don't often have men asking for that. They're usually asking for other services. So although we can house men, we typically don't have men asking for that service.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question or a comment? You can just unmute yourself. If you're on the phone, it's *6.
Vaughn, this is very, very impressive, and you're a very impressive guy, and I appreciate that and look forward to forwarding this information to others who may be helpful to the support of your program. But I'm very impressed, and I really appreciate your great work.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, and I'll just reiterate that. Somebody on the phone.
Yes. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Well, there's been no mention whatsoever in funding. Does money come from the state and federal government to support? How does YW get its support?
So we do have funding sources from grants, from state and from federal grants. I will say that a large portion, and I believe last time I had checked, it was almost half, if not more, of our funding support actually comes from community support and individual donors and donations. So we actually rely heavily on the community to be able to continue offering the services that we do.